My father bought a grocery store in a city called Clarkston, Georgia. Clarkston's now kind of famous, but back then it was mainly known as the next town over from the Stone Mountain where the Ku Klux Klan was headquartered. And my dad, being Jewish, had a little trepidation about that, but there was a wonderful family that sort of ran the city. And they told my dad, "You don't worry, we got your back." And my dad taught all those people in Clarkston, Georgia, about what being Jewish was really about. And he was probably a great ambassador for the Jewish religion in Clarkston. And at his funeral, the whole town of Clarkston was there. And about 10 of them had stories for me about how they had lost their job and they couldn't buy groceries. And my dad had told them to just go through the checkout, write a check. He'd take their check out and hold it, wouldn't deposit it until they told him it was okay. Because he said, "I don't want people seeing me giving you handouts. You don't need to do that. You go through just like any other customer." And that really made an impression on me. Yeah, so we founded the firm in 1977. It was really three of us who were very close friends. Elliot Cohen, who's no longer with us, and Marty Pollock and myself. And we founded the firm because we wanted to practice in an environment that was different than the environment of other law firms. Even back in the 70s, law firms could be very political and full of drama, and we decided we spend more time at the office than we do at home, and that we want to be in an environment that's like at home, where we're with friends and people who are collegial and not people who are invested in drama and promoting themselves and things like that. So that was our philosophy when we started. And we were very careful in hiring because we wanted to hire people that, as they say in baseball, are good in the locker room. It was a project that turned out to be pretty successful. We've had a very good track record in terms of retaining people, hiring good people, some who leave us for various reasons, very few who leave us to go to other law firms. And that's one of the things we're probably the most proud of. And several years ago, I decided it was time for me to step back from firm management after doing it for, 35, 40 years. It was plenty. And the firm elected Scott to be its managing partner, which I had no vote. And so this was not me passing it on to Scott. This was Scott earning it because he had the respect of his other partners. I will say that several of his partners have told me what a good managing partner he is. It's a hard job. I did it for a long time. It takes away from your practice time. You can stop thinking about client work when you go home, but it's hard to stop thinking about firm management when you go home. And so it turns into being full-time, 24/7 kind of a job. So I respect anybody who does that job, and it's a job that I told him not to take, but I think he felt he had a responsibility to do it, and he's obviously done it very well.
Well, I appreciate that. And I think when I was elected the managing partner, I think the hardest thing was trying to just further the vision of the founders. And I think it was really important to me personally to keep that familial friendship type atmosphere here and keep that going, because I think that's what made us most successful and the differentiator. And it doesn't just happen internally, the clients feel it too. They're relaxed when they come here. They really trust us as really their friends. They can come here and they don't necessarily just talk about their specific legal problems they've come here to talk to us about, but we hear about their kids, we hear about their grandkids, we hear about their parents, we hear about kind of everything going on with their family, and we have developed that relationship over time and have been with these families for generations and generations. His clients, now I'm representing their children. And they're coming to me and kind of the next generation. And the goal is to just kind of keep that going. So while my kids are young, I'm training them to come take my place.
That's where we differ. I tried to convince my kids to do something other than practice law. And I was successful 2 out of 3. but I failed with Scott.
I will say, however, of 8 of his grandchildren, 3 have already expressed an interest of going to law school. So
And
that's the 3 oldest.
Yeah, and I don't dissuade them. I actually encourage them. But I think, I think it's practicing law is hard.
It's very difficult.
I mean, you basically are working by the hour. When I'm sitting on the beach, I'm thinking I'm not billing time, so it's costing me money. My parents who owned a grocery store, they could sit on the beach, the cash register still being run. Business might not have been run the way they wanted, but the cash register was still running. I tried to explain that to them, and they never could understand the difference. But I think it's a tough profession, but it's rewarding. It can be very rewarding if you have the right kind of clients and the right kind of practice. So my dad, when he got married, my dad was actually a salesman who sold jukeboxes. And then he was going to Georgia State University or college back then at night and working during the day, and then he went into the Navy. And then when he came out of the Navy, he didn't go back to college. His father owned a grocery store that was probably not much bigger than this room on a street that was then called Hunter Street. It's now called Martin Luther King Boulevard, near the Mercedes-Benz Stadium in that general neighborhood. And when my father and his brother decided they were going to take that store over from my grandfather. And so that's how he got started in the grocery business. When I was born, he bought his brother out. His brother became a shoe manufacturer's rep for a shoe company. And he ran that grocery store until the city condemned the property to widen the street. And he lost the store. We have a good story about it. There was a lot across the street from where the store was that my grandfather had bought for, I think it was $5,000. He was making a decision between buying that lot and buying original issue Coca-Cola stock. As usual, he made the wrong decision. And I think we got $30,000 for that lot 25 years later, and the Coca-Cola stock would have been worth about $25 million. But anyway, slight disparity. But anyway, then my father bought a grocery store in a city called Clarkston, Georgia. Clarkston's now kind of famous, but back then it was mainly known as the next town over from the Stone Mountain where the Ku Klux Klan was headquartered. And my dad, being Jewish, had a little trepidation about that, but there was a wonderful family that sort of ran the city. And they told my dad, "You don't worry, we got your back." And my dad taught all those people in Clarkston, Georgia, about what being Jewish was really about. And he was probably a great ambassador for the Jewish religion in Clarkston. And at his funeral, the whole town of Clarkston was there. And about 10 of them had stories for me about how they had lost their job and they couldn't buy groceries. And my dad had told them to just go through the checkout, write a check. He'd take their check out and hold it, wouldn't deposit it until they told him it was okay. Because he said, "I don't want people seeing me giving you handouts. You don't need to do that. You go through just like any other customer." And that really made an impression on me. I would have never called my dad a philanthropist, but in a lot of sense, he was a philanthropist. When his store on Hunter Street had to close because of the street widening, he had a book that was about an inch thick with people who owed him money. And every Sunday, he and I would go down there, ride through the neighborhood, and he'd collect $1 here and $2 there. And then one Sunday, I said, "Well, are we going over to Hunter Street?" "No," he said. I threw the book away. So he was that kind of guy, and quite a role model for me. And I've tried to live up to that kind of example because it was really, hearing some of those stories was really moving, especially at his funeral and at the receptions thereafter. That's how he got in the grocery business. His store in Clarkston, he had actually 3 stores in Clarkston, each one bigger than the last. So he started out in a fairly small store, moved to a medium-sized store, and then got a full supermarket-size store, which he sold when he decided to retire to two guys who were managers of A&P grocery stores at the time. One of them still owns the store, and it's still open in Clarkston. So that's how my dad got in the grocery business. He used to ask me to come work in the store. I used to hide in the back room. I didn't want to do anything. I hated it. I didn't want to be there. I used to bring shoes to change because I couldn't stand up all day long in the same pair of shoes. He used to make fun of that. He tried to teach me butchering. I once cut up a chicken. He looked and said, "I've never seen a chicken cut like that in my life." And he said, "Son, you need to go make a living with your brain." And so I took that advice to heart, and I went to law school. My brother went into the business with my dad. We had a real interesting conversation about what my dad was going to do with the business when he died, which was he planned to give it to my brother. And so, my sister and I, neither one of us had any interest in the store. He was trying to figure out how to, probably my first case of business succession planning, right? So my dad was trying to pass the business to my brother. He ended up selling it, didn't happen. But we had in place a strategy to, in effect, compensate the kids who weren't in the business for the value of the business that was passing to my brother. And of course, one of the things I said to my dad, I said, you got to understand one thing. If you give me and my sister cash, he was going to buy a life insurance policy that was going to be payable to us. You give us cash, you're giving him a business that could go up or could go down. So if the business is worth X, you got to discount that to figure out what the fair cash amount is. And so that was sort of my first training in trying to advise people on how to pass a business from one generation to another when the kids aren't all the same, aren't all working in the business, or don't want to work in the business, or want to keep the business but don't want to be employed by the business. So it was good training because it was on the job training, and I think I think it did me good to go through that exercise where it meant something to me. And so in the course of our practice, which we represent lots of family businesses, that comes up over and over and over again.
Succession in a law firm is a little different than succession in a business. But on the personal side, I can certainly advise people on what it's like working with your dad. Doing it correctly means you have to work 8 times harder than everybody else has to work. If you don't do that, nobody respects you. You don't earn the respect of your peers, and everything goes downhill really fast. So I can certainly speak to that aspect. But from a succession plan, there's just so many factors that go in family dynamics that go into it, as we've already talked about, in the business, out of the business. But if everybody's in the business, it's almost more difficult, right? It's more difficult in what that dynamic is going to be. Are you going to have 3 people making all of the decisions if there's 3 kids? You're going to have 2 kids making all of the decisions. How are you designating who is the main decision maker? Does everybody in charge of a certain part of the business? The interdynamics of how that business is going to operate in the next generation, because for so long it's just been dad or mom. They're the one making 100% of the decisions with respect to the business, and when they're gone and it's to the children, that is a whole different dynamic that you really have to address. And there's not really one right way that we can sit here and say that's how it's going to be. Sometimes it's one of the children is very entrepreneurial. They're probably the best in the CEO role. One of them might be perfect in the accounting CFO role. And one of them is more operational, does exactly what the business does. They understand it. They're maybe a salesperson, whatever, and you just designate them in charge of those different departments, and that dynamic works. That's obviously idealistic, and you don't really get that all the time. But I think at the real root of it is to get the family together and kind of understand the dynamic, understand the personalities, understand the people involved, and what their ultimate vision and goal is, right? Do they want to run this until they get to the next generation? Is it just kind of a 5-year plan to grow it and then sell it? And then they just kind of take their proceeds and go and do their own thing? But I think that it's that really initial meeting with dad and mom, hopefully there, and the kids, and kind of figure out what is the plan? What do we need to really put into place? Because at the end of the day, we can draft a document that's not going to be perfect. There's no way it can be perfect because we can't tell the future. We don't know what it's going to do. But the goal is to put that agreement in the drawer, and hopefully you never need to pull it out. But it's there in case something goes sideways. When we were talking and really had clear heads about everything, what did we decide we would want to do if this came up? And so you have it there for you as that just in case, so things don't really go sideways and you end up suing each other and blowing up the business completely. You pull out your agreement out of the drawer and be like, oh yeah, that's what we decided. This is how we're going to go. And then you move on to the next thing. And I think that's really kind of almost how you can only address these types of situations, because they are so dynamic and complex. And you just it's one of those that's just an evolving thing that you just constantly have to work on.
In my experience, the hardest part of this is when you have kids in the business and kids outside the business, because oftentimes there's a misalignment of interest there. You would think everybody's in it for the business to grow and get more valuable, but oftentimes the kids in the business want to take the profits and reinvest it in the business. They're getting a salary, probably a nice salary. They're not starved for cash, but they may have siblings who don't have big salary positions. Some do wonderful community service kind of things. They're teachers, they're clergy. Their biggest investment is interest in the business that they own, but they're not in on operations. And so there becomes a lot of pressure to have dividends paid or some distributions at some minimum level. And it's always been my experience that can cause a lot of consternation. The kids inside the business want to buy a new building and they want to reinvest every penny and leverage it up a little bit because they need a new building. And the kids outside the business are going, we'd like to have some piece of that distributed to us. And so I think you have to try to build in some sort of pressure release valve for those things. And one of the things I've been doing for a long time is giving these kids who are outside the business a right to sell a certain percentage of their stock or all of their stock back to the company on certain terms if they want to liquefy their investment. Having that piece of paper telling them they're an owner is great, but if it doesn't result in anything tangible, it's a real cause of disconnection. And I think that's one of the harder things to deal with, especially if the level of success among the siblings is very different in terms of financial success. And so the financial needs are different. And I think that trying to solve that equation is one of the hardest things that you have, because they're clearly misaligned on some of their interests. Well, it's never too late. I mean, it may be more difficult, but it's not too late if everybody is willing to pull in the same direction.
Right.
Sometimes, this can be anything from a fist fight to a lawsuit to a kumbaya. I mean, it just really depends on the individuals. And if you have, really bitter, and this is what happens. I mean, it's sort of like, when you have an estate plan and there's 3 siblings and 2 of them get 40% and 1 of them gets 20%. And there's been no conversation and there's been no rationale. The one who got 20% immediately thinks the 2 that got 40% somehow influenced their parents.
Right.
When oftentimes it's the parent who made that decision but didn't have the guts to communicate it. So this is the same kind of thing. You're in the business, you're making lots of money, I got left out, nobody told me this was going to happen, nobody told me I wasn't going to get anything for what I've got, what can I do with it? I've done many deals where we've had that kind of difficult situation. A lot of times they bring someone in, a third party, to talk to the family. So I had one family, there were 5 siblings. two of the siblings were really smart and really productive in the business, and three of them were not as productive, let's say. And they brought in an outside consultant, and the outside consultant convinced the two that were interested in working productively in the business to buy out the three that were not, and they did. And the three agreed because they saw a nice chunk of cash. The business was able to lever itself up enough to pay them. But over time, the business became very, very valuable, much more valuable than what these guys got for their buyout. And there was some bitterness and jealousy over that. But at the end of the day, it did make the business survive. The business is now on the third generation. And so the two that stayed in the business, they each had 3 kids. So there were 6 potential kids to work in the business. Not all of them did, but a few of them did. And the 2 picked one, and that one was basically accepted by everybody as the new leader because they had been talking. They had hired actually a third party to come in and be president of the company. And that person ran the company until they were satisfied that there was a child who was ready to take it over. And they agreed, the 2 senior members agreed, and they appointed the third, and he was basically ratified by all of them. So, and the ones that aren't in the business, I think there's 3 in the business and 3 that aren't. The ones that aren't in the business, they're on the board, and they're smart, and they come and they contribute. So it's they handle it. They're almost a textbook. If you could give a textbook on how to do this, they're the textbook example. They're unusual. It's not the usual. It's the unusual. But they are an example, and probably can make a lot of money if they hired themselves out to advise other companies that find themselves in these predicaments. But this is part psychologist,
Right.
part lawyer, part minister. I mean, it's just a combination of a lot of different things, because it's so often you hear, well, they liked you better.
Right.
They've always favored you. You always got more than me. I mean, that's what comes out. I'm used to it from estate planning. I hear that all the time. So it's the same thing with the business. It's really sort of translates. Communication, to all my clients, most important thing. It's not good for me to break bad news to your kids. It's better for you to do it and tell them why.
Right. And I think to be proactive, right? It's just more of you can kind of see an issue coming on the horizon, and instead of just waiting until that issue comes and dealing with it down the road, is be proactive about it. Like that particular client hired the consultant to come in and kind of talk them through the different issues and advise them on probably what the best solution is. And instead, I think what a lot of clients do is, the one that's not really in the business is thinking about coming in the business, so I'm going to wait and see what they do. And then inevitably, that just goes wrong. But I think an important thing to understand is these plans are changeable. It's not like once you set it, it's set in stone, and you can't, if one comes back in the business, they're out of luck. You deal with basically the picture you have at that moment when you're trying to address the issues. And then if things change, we fix the plan. We amend it, we modify it to affect the situation as it currently is. But I think the goal is, as long as you're proactive about it, you identify the issue, get everybody together, communicate what you think the issues are, how you want to address them, you're really above the curve as far as getting that, a smooth transition to the next generation. In a multi-generational, if dad and mom are still alive, it's probably dad and mom who have all the decision-making authority. They're making that decision. But the hierarchy of the businesses is you just go by whatever they have. The shareholders have to be on board, owners have to be on board, the managers or board of directors have to be on board with the sale. And once you've elected to do that, one is prepping the business to be sold. And you kind of can do, are the books and financials clean? You go through and kind of do a financial due diligence internally to make sure everything looks good. Is the management team in place? If you sell and mom and dad are going to ride off into the sunset? Are the children going to stay in place as key employees for the acquirer? Your business looks a lot less attractive if the entire management team leaves once you've purchased it. And now you have to, as the buyer, replace everybody in high-level positions. So, getting a good management team in place, key employees that are going to stay and help benefit the buyer and, keep the job and the business going. Those are certainly steps that you have to take to get this business ready. A lot of our clients, have, I would say, an inflated view of what the value of their business is. And so, going through an exercise of getting what an actual value of your business is very, very helpful in those situations to kind of see what you'll be expecting to get offers wise from a potential acquirer. And then, how are we going to market it and get it out into the industry to see what kind of bites you're going to get from buyers, and that can be anything. What do you want to go to a strategic buyer, which is maybe it's a competitor, maybe it's not a competitor, but somebody in the industry that is swallowing up different companies like yours. Maybe it's somebody that just wants what you're particularly good at to add on to what they are particularly good at, and you market yourself to them. Or is it going to be a private equity firm where they're just going to come in and basically inject some capital into your company, hope for some pretty quick growth, and then an exit. And so a lot of conversations have to be had. What's best in market, and really it depends on your business. Some businesses much easier to go the strategic buyer route. Some businesses you're very primed for a private equity venture capital investment, and so it's just going through those different machinations with your company, with the board, with the management, and kind of getting it ready to be sold.
I think the hardest decision is the first one. Do we want to be multi-generational, or do we want to sell? And I think you can have a lot of difference of opinion on that. There may be family members who really want to see this, we're the second generation, we want it to go to the third, and we want our kids to be the fourth, and we want to keep it moving. There's an old saying that it's shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations, which means the third generation generally crashes and burns. But that's not always true. And I think that initial decision, for some families, it's very emotional. They have an emotional attachment to their business. Their business is like their child. And seeing it go to somebody else can be really hard to deal with. And you can also have split decisions on that kind of thing. So, I've seen a lot of companies where the parents say, we don't want to deal with the succession planning, so let's just sell. And the kids say, we want to keep this in the family forever, we'll work it out. Mm-hmm. And you can have that sort of conflict. And I think it's the healthiest thing in the world. Because either they do work it out, or they all agree, well, we can't work it out, so let's sell. This always goes back to some sort of emotional attachment to the business, which I certainly understand. I mean, there's always also the option that I've seen some businesses do successfully of saying, we're going to bring in outside management, professional management. We'll manage the managers, but they're going to manage the business, and that can work. It can also not work, but I think that's there's a transition period with the professional manager, and if you got the right guy or girl, it may work very well. If you don't, you might have to look further, but it's a minority position. Yeah. A lot of these family businesses can't imagine a non-family member running it. But I've seen it happen, and I've seen it be successful, and so it's an option. It's a very fascinating thing to watch because it has all kinds of, it's a good reality TV show subject. It could, are the Joneses going to sell their business, or are they going to run it multi-generational, or are they going to bring an outside management in? So there's a lot of dynamic, and it's a lot of fun conversations. And you get to know, this is how you get to know your clients, right? You get to know them when you see them in these kind of situations, and you get to see who they are, who they really are.
Yeah, I think an option too we never really discussed is the kids actually buy the business from mom and dad. it always kind of sounds like it's uneven, but the two in the business are in the business. Mom and dad sell it to them for fair market value, and they buy it. That happens too. And sometimes it's usually favorable, on terms, but they're generally buying the interest, and they give the option to all the kids to do it, and the ones that take the option buy the business and run it from there. So, it's not always just here's to the next generation, here's your business. I've had a few where they got a valuation and sold it to their kids, and the parents took money. These businesses are really the wealth of the family. That's it. They are the income, they are the source of all financial well-being for the entire family. And that's when it becomes the most important thing. Some of them, they have already built all the wealth that they could possibly want, and the business is kind of at this point, they don't care, right? Mom and dad, here, you can have it. I have all I need. But when it's really the central financial spigot for everybody in the family, that's when it becomes really, really, really difficult and complex.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen a lot of families where they've sold the businesses and gotten really big amounts of money, but their whole view of spending changes. Because really and truly, the business was a printer of money, and now they can't print money anymore.
Yeah.
So they have a finite amount that they see in an account that goes up and down every day, and when they pull something out, it goes down. And it's a really interesting, even though it's a lot of wealth, how they don't, for a long time, it takes them to adjust to the fact that they're now taking money out of accounts that they were used to putting money into. And some people don't adjust to that very well, and other people adjust to it so well that they run out of the money. But it's an interesting dynamic, because it is sort of like having a printing press and then selling the printing press, and you got to hope you got enough for the printing press that you don't need to be printing any more money.